In the middle of the 21st century, along a strip of green, forested borderland in Southeast Asia, artillery fire once again echoes between Thailand and Cambodia. To Buddhist countries, both following Theravada, both eating rice, fish sauce, laughing at very similar jokes. Yet every time there is a problem over a borderline or an ancient temple, the atmosphere heats up so much that people feel like they cannot share the same sky. Why can two peoples with so many similarities so easily fall into confrontation? And why can a single mountaintop temple, Preah Vihear, be enough to ignite a border crisis that drags on for decades? To understand why Thailand and Cambodia seem to never get along, we have to go very far back to a time when the map of Southeast Asia looked very different from today. Nowadays, people often think of Cambodia as a small country surrounded by stronger neighbors. But 600 to 800 years ago, this land was the center of a vast empire, the Khmer Empire, with its capital at Angkor, controlling wide areas of what is now Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam. Temples like Angkor Wat or Bayon are not only architectural heritage, they are symbols of a golden age of power in the collective memory of the Khmer people. History, however, rarely stands still. From the 14th century onward, the balance of power began to shift. The Thai peoples, with kingdoms like Sukhothai and Lair Ayutthaya, gradually rose. In 1431, Siamese forces attacked and sacked Angkor, marking a major turning point. The political center of Cambodia slowly moved southward, while Thai influence expanded eastward. In Cambodian historical memory, this period is remembered as a chain of tragedies in which a stronger neighbor invaded, plundered, and carried off people into slavery. In Thai chronicles, the same events often appear as the story of a new power asserting its strength. One sequence of events, but to completely different historical memories. On one side, a wound, on the other, a source of pride. For centuries afterward, wars between Siam and Cambodia erupted at regular intervals. As Cambodia weakened because of internal conflict, religious strife, and pressure from other neighbors, Ayutthaya repeatedly sent armies across the border, seizing land and taking tens of thousands of Cambodians away as laborers and artisans. In the modern Cambodian imagination, many people still see that era as the time when Siam bullied them. In Thailand, those campaigns are sometimes remembered as the heroic deeds of kings. As a result, both peoples grow up with the feeling that the other side once posed an existential threat, a fragment of collective memory that can be easily reactivated whenever a border crisis arises. Then came the colonial era. In the late 19th century, Cambodia became part of French Indochina, while Siam, later Thailand, skillfully walked a tightrope to preserve nominal independence, in part by ceding territory to European powers. The French and the Siamese signed border treaties in 1904 and 1907, redrawing the line between a French-controlled Cambodia and an independent Siam. The problem was that very few locals had any say in this process. Those lines on the map were often drawn more for the convenience of colonial administrators than for the realities of communities that had lived there for generations. Among those lines, one small detail would later have enormous consequences. The Anexa map placed the Preah Vihear temple perched on a cliff that geographically seems to face Thailand, on Cambodian territory. When the French left and Cambodia became independent in 1953, the question who does Preah Vihear belong to appeared almost immediately. Thai troops occupied the temple complex, arguing that under the principle of the border follows the watershed of the mountain range, the temple must belong to Thailand. Cambodia, meanwhile, relied on the French-drawn map to claim that the temple lay on its soil. The two sides could not agree, so Cambodia brought the case to the International Court of Justice (ICJ). In 1962, the ICJ ruled that Preah Vihear belonged to Cambodia, partly on the grounds that Thailand had for many years accepted and used that map. Legally, the dispute seemed resolved. Emotionally, however, many Thais felt they had lost a sacred temple because of a game of international law. Cambodians saw it instead as a rare victory after centuries of being looked down upon and pushed around. For decades afterward, the area around Preah Vihear was less a tourist destination than a battleground. Cambodia's civil war, American bombing during the Indochina Wars, and then the Khmer Rouge turned the Dangrek Mountains into a zone full of landmines and armed groups. In that context, the border dispute was effectively frozen by a much larger war. Only in the late 1990s, when Cambodia began to stabilize and the Khmer Rouge disintegrated, did the areas start to open again to visitors. And ironically, it was precisely when peace returned that the long-dormant dispute was awakened. In 2008, Cambodia decided to nominate Preah Vihear as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. From a heritage standpoint, this seemed quite natural. It is an 11th century Khmer temple, unique in architecture and in its cliff-top location. The Thai government initially signed a note supporting the bid, but was immediately accused by domestic protest movements of selling land to Cambodia. Nationalist sentiment flared up, crowds marched to the border, and the armies of both sides deployed forces facing each other, sometimes only a few hundred meters apart. What started as a UNESCO file rapidly turned into a security crisis. From 2008 to 2011, the area around Preah Vihear and several other ancient temples along the border became a hot front line. The two sides exchanged artillery fire multiple times, soldiers were killed, and villagers had to flee. By 2011, dozens of people were dead and tens of thousands had been displaced by shelling. In 2013, the ICJ once again had to step in, this time to interpret its 1960 judgment. Not only the temple, but also the promontory on which it stands was held to belong to Cambodia, while nearby hills remained disputed. On paper, this was meant to settle the issue. In practice, the 800-plus kilometer border still has many undemarcated segments, and the mentality of win versus lose remains deeply embedded in domestic politics on both sides. In recent years, just when people thought everything had calmed down, clashes have erupted again. Since mid-2025, international news has once more reported shelling, mortar, even airstrikes along the Thai-Cambodian border. A landmine explosion injures a Thai soldier. Thailand blames Cambodia for laying mines. Cambodia denies it and accuses Thailand of provocation. Accusations fly back and forth. Artillery is fired in retaliation, and hundreds of thousands of people are forced to evacuate villages near the front line. All of this shows that the dispute is not just history, it is very much alive in the present. Why, then, does conflict so easily flare up again? Part of the answer lies in how each side tells its own history. Many researchers have pointed out that school curricula and public discourse in both Thailand and Cambodia tend to emphasize chapters of history framed as betrayals, partition, and aggression by neighbors. In Thailand, people talk about lost territories ceded to colonial France, including areas that are now part of Cambodia. In Cambodia, they highlight the sacking of Angkor by Siam, the abduction of their people, and the loss of their lands. When children grow up with a narrative that the other side once stole their land, their heritage, even their national soul, then a border dispute is easily felt as a matter of honor, not just of law or economics. Another factor that cannot be ignored is domestic politics. In both countries, whenever a government faces crisis, from corruption scandals and power struggles to economic discontent, taking a tough stance toward the neighbor sometimes becomes a tool to demonstrate strength. A strong statement about sovereignty, a heavily publicized visit to a frontline outpost, or a loud protest against the other side's map can be very useful in domestic political terms. When the mentality of "we cannot appear weak in front of Cambodia," Thailand spreads, the room for compromise shrinks noticeably. And when hardline rhetoric is amplified on social media, it travels fast and wins applause, while more moderate voices are easily dismissed as soft or unpatriotic. Meanwhile, everyday life along the border is far more complex and gray than the black and white stories shown on television. Tens of thousands of Cambodian workers labor in factories, construction sites, and service jobs in Thailand, sending money back to support their families. Traders on both sides bring agricultural products and consumer goods to cross-border markets. Many families have relatives in both countries. For them, the border is a place to make a living, not a place to die over lines on a map. Every time conflict erupts, the first to suffer are precisely these communities: fields left fallow, markets shut down, children sleeping in temporary shelters. If we look deeper, we can see at least 3 layers of detonators stacked on top of one another. The first is the long history of shifting power, from the time when the Khmer were the regional powerhouse to later centuries when Thai kingdoms rose, leaving behind two opposing memories. The second is the wound of the colonial and post-colonial era, borders drawn by great powers, judgments handed down by international courts like the ICJ institutions that not everyone trusts as fair, especially when they cut into national pride. The third is modern nationalism, nurtured by media, social networks, and short-term political calculations. Ordinary people on both sides do not always hate each other, but they live in an information environment where suspicion and anger toward the other side is sometimes encouraged. The clearest symbol of these overlapping layers of conflict is Preah Vihear itself. Culturally and religiously, it is a Hindu-Buddhist Khmer temple, tied to ancient mythology and architecture. Geographically and militarily, it occupies a strategic position on a cliff overlooking vast plains. Legally, it is the subject of an international case that has twice gone before the ICJ. Psychologically, it is a place where both Thais and Cambodians feel they have reasons to claim. Cambodians say it is the heritage their ancestors built. Thais say it is part of the lost territories, when a small site can at once be sacred heritage, military strongpoint, and symbol of national honor. Every stone and every meter of ground around it becomes sensitive. But the story does not end with one temple. Along the Thai-Cambodian border, there are many other overlapping areas where old maps, new maps, actual settlement patterns, and legal interpretations do not match. In such places, a newly opened road, a boundary marker moved a short distance, or even a police post relocated a few hundred meters can be interpreted by the other side as encroachment. Demarcating the border requires technical surveying, historical memory, and political goodwill, and lacking any one of those, everything can end in stalemate. At the regional level, this tense relationship is also a test for ASEAN, an organization built on principles of non-interference and consensus. When two member states clash, it is hard for the others to arbitrate without being suspected of bias. In previous flare-ups, there were moments when Indonesia and other states tried to mediate, even proposing observation mechanisms along the border. More recently, outside powers have also shown interest in mediation, sometimes backed by economic leverage. Yet every time a third party becomes involved, there is a risk of deepening the feeling that we are being dictated to, which in turn fuels domestic nationalism. In this multi-layered picture, ordinary people are easily swept up by simple slogans, such as "they stole our land" or "they don't respect our sovereignty." The media, especially social media, ensures that emotionally charged stories, images of flags, soldiers, ancient temples, and crying refugees spread very quickly. It is much harder for more nuanced messages, for example, that both sides may have valid arguments, or that many of the problems are legacies of colonialism, to receive the same level of attention. When a short clip can trigger a wave of outrage in just a few hours, while diplomatic negotiations require months or years, the balance between emotion and reason tends to tilt toward the former. So, do Thailand and Cambodia truly cannot share the same sky? The answer, when we look closely, is much more complicated than that slogan. At the level of states and symbols, it is true that the two sides still have unresolved disputes, and that those disputes are tightly tied to historical memory and national honor, making them hard to set aside. But at the human level, other stories quietly coexist, Thai and Cambodian monks chanting side by side at shared religious ceremonies. Cambodian workers in Bangkok sending money home to families in Banti Nianchi. Thai tourists visiting Angkor, Cambodian visitors working in Thailand's tourism industry. These ties do not make headlines, but they are persistent and real. Experts have suggested many ways to break the cycle of clash, ceasefire, clash again. One idea is to denationalize heritage sites like Preah Vihear, treat them as shared regional assets jointly managed by both countries, with both sharing tourism revenues. Another is to reform school textbooks so that instead of telling history solely in the language of we are the victims, they are the aggressors, they also highlight periods of exchange and mutual contribution to regional culture. Alongside that is the development of joint economic zones in which cross-border economic interests tie the two sides together, making war an option that is simply too costly for anyone to choose. Of course, saying this is easier than doing it. Changing textbooks requires political will. Agreeing on joint management of temples requires mutual trust. Developing border economies requires long-term investments in infrastructure and stability. But history also shows that there were times when Siam and Cambodia traded, exchanged art, and even shared many elements of culture and religion. If the past can create conflicts that last for centuries, it can also provide a foundation for building new bridges if people choose to retell different chapters of that history, not only the bloodiest ones. When the sun sets over the Dangrek range, the last golden light of the day falls on the ancient steps of Preah Vihear. From that height, it is hard for the naked eye to see exactly where the border runs. Up there, it is still just an old temple looking down on stretches of dark green forest, where Thais and Khmer alike live, farm, and pray for good weather and harvests. The real question is not why can't they share the same sky, but whether they want to continue living under a sky divided by the past, or are willing to rewrite the story so that 50 years from now, when people mention the Thai-Cambodian border, they think of a shared heritage and cooperation rather than a hotspot where war is always one misstep away. The final answer does not lie entirely in the hands of international courts, nor in maps drawn by colonial powers, but in the choices made by generations of leaders and citizens on both sides. History has bound them together in both good and bad ways. The question is whether they will continue to see each other as eternal enemies, or as neighboring peoples who must learn to share one patch of sky.